Welcome back to Pleased to Dwell, chapter 12, God with us, God like us, a Nazarene. Okay, so at the end of chapter 2, this is the end of Matthew's Christmas account, if you like. We've just got a few verses where Joseph, Mary, and Jesus have to essentially transit from Egypt back to where they're going to live. But God is very involved in this. He warns Joseph in a dream to head back. Herod has died. And then we're told he got up, took the child and his mother and entered the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Archelaus was kind of like his father in the bad sense. But unlike his father, he didn't have the political kind of nous to know when to calm down. So he was kind of slightly terrifying. In fact, the Romans, after him, they changed the whole system in the region and put a governor in place instead of him. So, being warned in a dream, Joseph here for the second time in these few verses, warned in a dream, withdrew to the region of Galilee. Then he went and settled in a town called Nazareth to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. Now, this is kind of an intriguing thing here. Which prophets? Well, it's a kind of a complex situation. We don't have a direct quote here. We're not sure really what he's referring to. There's a couple of possibilities, but it seems like he's ultimately pointing to the location. That's really the focus. He wants to get the Nazareth part as the focus, and it makes sense. In the chapter so far, there have been several fulfillments of prophecy, and in each one there's a reference to a place. There's Bethlehem for the birth. There's out of Egypt, I have called my son, from Hosea. There's the voice heard from Ramah, which is Bethlehem area. And so here now we've got this Nazareth reference. And I think that's the emphasis in the book. I go through the alternative options and they all relate and they're all helpful. But really the place seems to be significant. God wants Jesus to be called a Nazarene. Let's go to the book. Nazareth was 5 miles from Sepphoris, the strongest military center in Galilee. It was on a branch of the great caravan route to Damascus. For traders, soldiers, and travelers, Nazareth was just a rest stop on the way to somewhere better. Essentially, Jesus grew up in nowhere Galilee. Was this the next best thing since God's plan A, Bethlehem, had been thwarted by troublesome Herodian rulers? Not at all. God directed Joseph so that Mary was brought back to Nazareth and Jesus was brought up in Nazareth, and this meant that the Messiah, born in Bethlehem, would always be called the Nazarene. Okay, the name, the Nazarene, is really significant. Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus was a common name, and so you couldn't just say Jesus and know who you're referring to, because there's a whole host of Jesuses all over the place. It was like Simon and Judas, and it was a very common name. And so with a common name, you'd have an identifier. We kind of do the same thing today when you've got a lot of Daves in a church. Which Dave are you referring to? Oh, Scottish Dave, Welsh Dave, Dave the musician, Dave the plumber, Dave, big Dave, short Dave. There's always a kind of an identifier, and they had the same thing. And so what would be the identifier for Jesus? Son of Joseph? Not once Joseph dies. That would be less useful. By the time Jesus is in ministry, Jesus gets referred to as Jesus of Nazareth, the place where he was from. And that label sticks with him throughout the Gospels, sticks with him during his trial, his crucifixion, his resurrection, even in the Ascension. When we come into the book of Acts, 8 times he's referred to as Jesus of Nazareth. And maybe the most thrilling one is when Jesus appears to Saul on the road to Damascus. And Saul says, "Who are you?" He refers to himself from heaven as Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, so one more quote from the book. God was with this Jesus of Nazareth. And in his willingness to carry this label in ministry up north and down south, in his arrest, his crucifixion, his resurrection, and even in his ascension, this Jesus of Nazareth was most assuredly with us. Emmanuel, God with us, not just near us in some nice palace somewhere, but with us, like in Nazareth with us, Jesus of nowhere Galilee. He came to be with us so that he could be for us. And he is forever with us. for he still carries the lowliest of labels. It was all part of God's plan that he should be called a Nazarene. It's a beautiful thought to kind of launch out of the birth of Jesus and into the ministry of Jesus for the rest of Matthew's gospel. This is God with us, right with us, in a peasant living room, in a peasant home at his birth, in Nazareth growing up and carrying the label of Nazareth throughout his career, his ministry years, but also throughout history ever since. In the biblical record up in heaven, Jesus is still Jesus of Nazareth because he is God with us. Thanks for watching. Next time, we're going to turn over a few pages and we're going to get into Luke's gospel and Luke's account of the Christmas story.